Spider-Man Far From Home is once again directed by John Watts, who returns after Spider-Man Homecoming, and this movie is the follow-up to the second highest grossing film of all time, Avengers Endgame, which at this point we've already come to the conclusion that it's not going to beat Avatar, and I think at this point it's still like 12 million away from that record, but it's not going to get it, and also who cares, because it already surpassed Avatar's original theatrical run, so really, who gives a fuck? But anyway, this movie once again follows Peter Parker in a world where there is no longer Iron Man, and Peter is depressed because of this, but also he just wants a break from being a superhero, and he's getting this vacation with a science trip through Europe, or at least a science class trip through Europe, where he plans on just relaxing and also getting up the courage to tell MJ, played by Zendaya, that he likes her. But as most of you know from most superhero movies, if a superhero wants a break, life finds a way to fuck them over. And so these large elemental creatures keep popping up around the world, and a couple are coming to Europe while he's there. And so S.H.I.E.L.D. leader Nick Fury hijacks Peter's summer vacation and recruits him to battle these elementals with the help of a warrior from an alternate universe, or alternate dimension, named Quentin Beck, or as we know him in the comic book fan arena, Mysterio. I was excited about this film for a number of reasons. The first one is that this is the first standalone Spider-Man film that didn't take place in New York for either the majority of the time or just it taking solely in New York, especially because, if I remember correctly, in Spider-Man Homecoming, they did go to DC for a little bit. And so I thought it'd be interesting with this movie, since the primary focus was in Europe. And the second one was Tom Holland. I loved Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and up to this movie, he was on track to becoming my favorite Spider-Man in a live-action format. And finally, I've loved the Mysterio character ever since I first encountered him in the video game adaptation of the second Raimi Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire. And he has been one of my favorites in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, with his abilities and backstory. And when I heard that a world-class talent like Jake Gyllenhaal was picked to portray Beck, I became more excited. I was just like, okay, that's it. That's all I need. I'm gonna see this movie regardless. I don't even need to see any trailers. And while I wasn't looking forward to this movie as much as, say, Endgame, my excitement was still really high, especially since this film is considered the official end to Phase 3 of the MCU, which has gone on for a long while, ever since Captain America Civil War, and I'm pretty sure that was like 10 plus films, 10 plus films ago. So I was wondering what reveals could there be in this movie that would set us up for later, and I wish I could get into that in this video, but I'm just going to make this a non-spoiler. I may go back and do a spoiler review on this movie, but I'm still not sure yet. But at the same time, I don't know. It's 50-50. I'll have to do a coin flip or something. But anyway, before I get into my thoughts on this film, I do want to throw out my normal disclaimer. So, for those of you uninitiated, the way that I convey my thoughts on a film is I do a pro and con list. It helps me compartmentalize, how I feel about the movie in a positive and negative way. I blanked. I didn't want to say way. I was trying to come up with a different word, but that's all that was in my head. But anyway, though I try to keep the sections separate, if I can make a pro and con work off of each other, or maybe if they're intrinsically tied together, then I will definitely take advantage of that. Anyway, there's your disclaimer. Let's go ahead and get into my review of Spider-Man Far From Home.
Everywhere I go, I see his face. I just really miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too. I don't think Tony would have done what he did if he didn't know that you were going to be here after he was gone.
You gonna be the next Iron Man now?
Well, no, I don't have time. I'm too busy doing your jobs.
What? I'm kidding. Look, keep up the good work.
Because I am going on vacation. I'm just talking about the trip.
I'm here in St. Marco Polo.
Oh, I think MJ really likes me.
That reminds me when I first fell in love.
You're a very difficult person to contact.
Spider-Man?
This is Mr. Beck.
We could have used someone like you on my world.
Your world?
Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap to our hole in our dimension.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
We have a job to do, and you're coming with us.
Gotta be someone else you can use. What about Thor?
Off-world.
Captain Marvel?
Unavailable.
But I'm just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Bitch, please, you've been to space.
What do you want, Peter?
I want to go back on my trip with the girl who I really like and tell her how I feel. MJ, I
am Spider-Man.
No, of course I'm not.
I mean, it's kind of obvious.
Are you going to step up or not?
With Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, this is the first time on the big screen that we've seen a version of Peter Parker who is basically taking baby steps, actual baby steps to fully becoming Spider-Man as we know him from the comic books. And I found that very interesting with how he improves on his abilities and his heroicness with each film that he's appeared in ever since his first appearance in Captain America Civil War. And Tom Holland has become my favorite Peter Parker / Spider-Man. The other two before him, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, were really good picks, but they both had downsides to their versions. I mean, Maguire was really great as Peter Parker. You could believe him as this awkward guy that a lot of us knew Peter Parker as, but I never really felt him on the Spider-Man front, especially in the movies. I mean, in the video games, he kind of acted quippy, but I couldn't really believe it with the way that he talks naturally, and so I didn't fully feel it with him, except for maybe a couple of times. And then on the flip side, Andrew Garfield brought us that more quippy Spider-Man that we expected from the comics, but I was never sold on him as an awkward teenager. I mean, he portrayed the idea of Peter Parker fine, but he always came across as way too smooth most of the time. But Tom Holland captures everything that we all expected from Peter Parker and Spider-Man, with the awkwardness and the quippiness. He's amazing in this role, and I really hope that we get to see him play Spidey for years to come. I enjoyed Zendaya in the first movie, and I did enjoy her in this one, though it did feel like they did change her up a bit in a way that didn't feel like natural character progression. But that being said, I did enjoy her in this movie, and I really thought that the chemistry between her and Holland was really cute, and I really thought that the interactions between MJ and Peter were sweet, and they did a really good job at extending and exploring their chemistry and relationship further. I'll get into the pro in a second, but I just wanted to do a new thing, which is fun fact. Jake Gyllenhaal has had an interesting history with Spider-Man. In fact, when Tobey Maguire had a back injury during the filming of Seabiscuit, Gyllenhaal almost replaced him as Spider-Man in the second Raimi Spider-Man movie. Just a fun fact for those who didn't know. But anyway, I thought that Gyllenhaal was great as Mysterio. I didn't like some of the things that they did with his character, mainly with some early explanations that definitely needed again, explaining, and maybe I'll get into them in the spoiler review, but there were also a couple of other scenes that kind of bothered me. But just know that for the most part, I was highly satisfied with how the character was written and portrayed. They put a much better focus on the biggest struggle that a superhero can have, especially for Spider-Man, which is just trying to balance his everyday life with his superhero life, because in this film, every single time that he tries to relax or tries to tell MJ how he feels about her, something comes up involving his alter ego that gets in the way of everything, and he has to make that choice. And usually it has to be with the superhero stuff, because again, he is a superhero. And it's something that I thought that Homecoming did well, but I actually prefer how they did it in this movie more. I'm a bit torn on this part because it's kind of both of a pro and a con, so I'll just go with it accordingly. So, the action sequences in the first film were fine. You could tell that John Watts hadn't done anything, he hadn't done action sequences before that point, so that was a bit more of an experimental phase for him. That's how I saw it. Which is fine, everybody has to start somewhere. Well, the helming of the action sequences in Far From Home are much better than in Homecoming for both the cinematography and editing across the board. But there are things with the action sequences in Homecoming that this movie didn't do as well at. It's just like a couple of things, especially if you compare Far From Home's first act to the first act of Homecoming, or even to Homecoming as a whole, because the first half of this film, the action sequences were really lacking in heart and excitement, and I really couldn't understand why. Now, there's something that happens later, some things that make up for all of what I just said, and you kind of understand why things are the way that they are, but it also didn't excuse the fact that I was a tad bit bored watching the action sequences. But then the quality ramped up about halfway through in the second half, particularly in any sequences where it showcased just how powerful Peter has gotten as Spider-Man, as well as when it showed off the full realm of Mysterio's abilities and powers. And speaking of Mysterio's abilities, his abilities lend to perhaps some of the greatest sequences in a Spider-Man movie that I really wish that I could talk about because they were so fucking cool, but spoilers. I especially loved the mid-credits sequence because it was just one of those things that made you question what the hell is going to happen with Spider-Man in the next phase, but in a good way. And also, it has a great moment that any fan of Spider-Man will love. The end credit scene does the same, where you wonder where the hell everything's going in Phase 4, but I was personally taken more aback by the mid-credit scene. I was more invested. It was one of those ones where it was basically like this. I was sitting there with my wife and I was just like, holy shit! And now we're getting into our last cons. So, the first 20 minutes of this film are a real enigma to me. There was a large bit of humor, and things were going on, but everything seemed to fall flat in this portion. The humor wasn't connecting. There were too many awkward moments that felt like they were just there on purpose for the purpose of levity, and nothing landed correctly. It just, I don't know, hell, even our first introduction to Mysterio sped through really quickly, and it kind of put a weird feeling on the film until we saw him again, and then the movie started ramping up from there. Like many of the MCU's films, as I love to point out, they love disguising certain genres as a superhero movie. They have disguised what is basically a teen romance movie, though this one feels more like an Avengers movie because of the continued focus on Peter just trying to cope with the death of Tony Stark and basically becoming his heir apparent. And while I thought the balance was good, I've been slowly starting to worry about something with this universe. I've been worried that they've been slowly trying to turn Spider-Man into Iron Man Jr., which I know a lot of people had been worried about for a while before I even was. I know one of my favorite film pundits on YouTube, John Campea, he's been complaining about this for at least 2 or 3 years. And I didn't agree with him for the longest time, and I don't know, it never got to that point with me. I'm starting to get a little worried on that front. I mean, take another recent iteration of Spider-Man from the PS4 game. He's extremely smart like every other iteration of Peter Parker, and, you know, it's also shown with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. You can see that he's really smart, but the big difference is that the PS4 versions, Peter Parker was self-sufficient. He made his own suits and gear from scratch. Sure, every once in a while, Dr. Octavius would give him ideas for gear, but he made it himself for the most part. And I don't know, most of what Holland's Peter has now was either made by Stark or with Stark technology, and it really doesn't feel like he's making his own mark in this universe. I do still love this version of Spidey, but this is definitely a cause for a bit of concern for the future of Spider-Man, especially since I want him to basically become self-sufficient in a sort of way. And those are my thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. As a whole, I definitely enjoyed Homecoming more, but I did end up enjoying this movie, despite the fact that for me, it took a bit to really get good. But I really did enjoy it. I went in and I got the things that I wanted, things that I didn't know I wanted, and got maybe a couple of things that I could have done without. But all in all, this was definitely a satisfying conclusion to Phase 3, just like how the first Ant-Man movie was a really good and satisfying conclusion to Phase 2. Hey guys, I just wanted to say thank you for watching this video. In a few seconds, we'll have some buttons and stuff pop up. Click on my channel icon to subscribe to the channel and continue your much appreciated support, and you can also check out a couple of other videos on the channel as well, namely the most recently uploaded, which will be on the left side, and then the other one will be a video that's picked at random by a YouTube algorithm that'll be over on the right. So anyway, farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.